this is Warhawk Beyond 2040, and welcome to another edition of the Progressive Rock and Metal album review series. And today I'm going to be taking a look at the very long and impressive catalogue from a musician who I've been wanting to talk about for quite some time now on this series. And in my opinion, I consider this gentleman to be not only an important figure in all genres of music, but I also consider him to be a living ambassador for the 21st century as far as music is concerned. And whenever he releases a new album or is playing a live concert, it's always an event and it's always a big deal. And he's always getting people talking about him, whether it's positive or negative. People are always talking about him, and he always gets people's attention in terms of what his next move and announcement is going to be. This is someone who has built himself up a giant reputation and prides himself on the best sound, the best production, the best band, surrounds himself with the best musicians. And when you hear this guy, you know straight away who it is because he has a very recognizable sound. There's nobody else that sounds quite like him. And I consider him to be the ultimate musical chameleon. And he's not afraid of taking risks and trying out new things. And he's dabbled in all genres of music, from progressive rock to progressive metal to electronica to ambient to drone and to even pop as well. This guy is the real deal and he doesn't mess around. He has a very clear vision of what exactly he wants and how he wants things to sound. And like I said, this guy is without a doubt the real deal. And this is someone who marches to the beat of his own drum and always prefers to do things his way. You guys know who I'm talking about. He needs no introduction whatsoever. He is the greatest musician you have never heard of. I am talking about, of course, the one and only guitarist, multi-instrumentalist, composer, producer, and bandleader, Steven Wilson. So, Steven Wilson, as I mentioned, an important figure in music, and he's had an amazing career, and he's pretty much done it all, really. And he has played and co-led a number of different bands, from Base Communion to Continuum to No Man to Storm Corrosion with Mikael Ackerfeldt from Opeth to Blackfield, and of course the legendary progressive metal band Porcupine Tree. And aside from his many bands and projects, Steven Wilson has also produced and remixed a number of different catalogues for a variety of different bands, such as King Crimson, Jethro Tull, ELP, Tears for Fears, Black Sabbath, Rush, Opeth, Roxy Music, to name a few. And he has cemented himself as perhaps the most important producer since the legendary Alan Parsons. And for today's edition, I'm going to be taking a look at Steven Wilson's solo catalogue of albums, which consists of 10 albums, 6 studio albums, 2 EPs, and 2 live recordings. And I can honestly tell you now, this is a very strong and remarkable catalogue. Every album here is well produced and sounds fantastic. Each album is very different, and they all have their own personas and they all have their own identity. And I think what people will learn to appreciate and respect with Steven Wilson's music is he's not a guy who rests on his laurels. He's constantly pushing the envelope, challenging himself, constantly reinventing himself and refining his sound. And you can listen to one album and you could say, oh, that's Steven Wilson. And then you can listen to another album and say, wait, that's Steven Wilson, but it's a bit different to the one I listened to before. This is a guy who doesn't like to repeat himself. He's always trying out and dabbling into all genres of music. And as I said at the beginning, Steven Wilson is the ultimate musical chameleon, and a risk taker, and he's not afraid of taking risks. So, as always, I'm going to be talking about each album individually, and as always, I will be choosing which one I think is the best one. Not an easy challenge, especially when it comes to a remarkable and strong catalogue like Stephen Wilson's, but I think any of these albums are so good they could be a number one on any given day. So, no matter which album I choose as the best, my choice could change tomorrow or the next day or next week because that's how good this catalogue of Stephen Wilson's really is. So we're going to start with the first album, which came out in 2009, and this is a double album, Insurgentes. So Stephen Wilson recorded Insurgentes while he was still part of Porcupine Tree, and unlike his later albums where they were more band efforts, this album pretty much is a solo project. Stephen Wilson plays most of the instruments, and there's also some guest contributions from a number of different musicians. And for me, Insurgentes is an absolute classic, and this was the one that pretty much kick-started Stephen Wilson's solo career. So, as you can tell by the cover, there's no title, but you know it's a Stephen Wilson album because he has very unique artwork. No one else has album covers quite like him. So, when you see this, even if you don't know the name of the album, you can pick it up and look at it and say, oh yeah, I know that. That's Stephen Wilson because Stephen Wilson's albums, especially where his album covers are concerned, they're very unique. So it really gives you an idea of what kind of album you can expect and what kind of sound you're going to hear from him. And going by the album cover, you can see Stephen Wilson here with a gas mask. So you can kind of expect what this album is going to be like. So let's have a look. So as you can see, this is a double album. So there's 2 discs. So we're going to just have a look here. So as I mentioned, there is the artwork. Fantastic stuff here. So musicians featured on Insurgentes is we've got Gavin Harrison from Porcupine Tree, Theo Travis, who would go on to become an important collaborator for Stephen Wilson in his later projects. We've got Sand Snowman. We've also got Dirk Sires. We've also got Mike Outram, Jordan Rudess from Dream Theater, Tony Levin from King Crimson. We've also got Susanna Moyaho. We've also got Mikiko Yagi. So there are a number of different musicians from different bands who make guest contributions to Insurgentes. So there we have the artwork. Beautiful photography here. And there's Stephen Wilson with his classic gas mask. As we all know him. So anyone who's been to see Stephen Wilson shows or Porcupine Tree shows, you know this is kind of like a staple thing he does, wearing the gas mask. So there's another picture here, and the credits here as well. So all the music is written and composed by Stephen Wilson. Look at that, it's absolutely beautiful. Amazing. We're going to see quite a bit of this. Some creepy shots of some dolls. And there is the man himself, or the genius himself, shall I say. There we are. Looks like it's named after a road sign. And there's some more cool shots here. Creepy. And some more creepy shots here. spooky, really spooky. There we are. Amazing photography, I must say. That's absolutely amazing. I love that. It's absolutely brilliant. And there's another shot of Stephen Wilson. And then there's some more notes here and production notes as well. Kind of reminds me of that game Alone in the Dark or Resident Evil or something like that. That is absolutely spooky, that is. Really spooky. And that's it, there you go. So, tracks we got here are Harmony Corrine, which is probably one of the best Stephen Wilson tracks you will ever hear. And this one pretty much sets the tone for what Stephen Wilson's solo career is going to be all about. We got Abandoner, Salvaging, Veneno para las Hadas, No Twilight Within the Courts of the Sun, Significant Other, Only Child, Twilight Coda, Get All You Deserve, which will be named after a live album, and we also got the title track Insurgentes. So fantastic collection of songs. Every song on here is just fantastic from start to finish, and the standout tracks for me are Harmony Corrine, No Twilights Within the Courts of the Sun, Twilight Coda, Significant Other, which for me is just absolutely gorgeous and so savage on a Rush level. It's just really, really good. And Get All You Deserve, and the title track as well. So it's just an absolute amazing song. And all of the tracks on here, they're just fantastic. And it is a brilliant sounding album. And that's what you get here with Stephen Wilson. The best sound, the best production, and more importantly, the best musicians. Absolutely fantastic. So there you have it. The first Stephen Wilson album, Insurgentes. Perfect place to start if you're looking to get into Stephen Wilson's solo catalogue. It's absolutely remarkable, and for me, one of Stephen Wilson's absolute best, a true masterpiece. So there you have it, Insurgentes. Fantastic stuff. So we move on to the next album, which came out in 2011, and this is a double album, Grace for Drowning. So by this point, Porcupine Tree has pretty much been put on ice and gone into indefinite hiatus, and Stephen Wilson has officially gone full-fledged solo. So unlike Insurgentes, which was pretty much a solo project, Grace for Drowning would mark the beginning of Stephen Wilson putting together his own working band of musicians. And for me, as great as Insurgentes is, and it's one of Stephen Wilson's absolute best, Grace for Drowning officially kicks this whole thing off, and for me, it's absolutely remarkable. It's one of my all-time favourite Stephen Wilson albums, and it's got a lot of my favourite songs on this album, and it's just an absolute classic. And as I said, you can kind of look at this as the first official Stephen Wilson solo album. Insurgentes, on the other hand, was more like a solo project with guest contributions. Grace for Drowning would feature some important collaborators who would go on to become important key players in Stephen Wilson's solo band. So, just like always, there's no album title on the front cover, but you can tell just by looking at the artwork that this is Stephen Wilson. And as I mentioned before, you pick up an album, even if you don't see the name of the artist or the title, you just look at it and say, yeah, I know who that is. That's Stephen Wilson. And I think that's the beauty of Stephen Wilson. His albums, especially his album covers, I tend to look at them as like books, like when you pick up a book, you see the cover, and you think, wonder what this is like. And then you start to read it, and then you're just completely immersed into what you're reading. And that's kind of like what Stephen Wilson's albums are. They're like storybooks. So even if you don't know the title, you see the cover, it grabs your attention, and you just think, oh, I'd like to check that out. And then before you know it, you're just completely taken on a journey. So let's have a look, shall we? So just like Insurgentes, this is a double album, and we got here all the tracks are written and composed by Stephen Wilson. So disc one is called Deform to Form a Star, and disc two is called Like Dust I Have Cleared from My Eye. So it's funny how it's a double album, but they both got different titles. So I think that's kind of cool that Stephen Wilson has done things like that. Really sets him apart from other musicians. So there we are. That atmospheric, abstract artwork that Stephen Wilson is known for. There we are. As you can see, there's Wilson as well. The sun is so bright, it blinds my eyes. Some amazing artwork here. And there's the cover as well. And I got some sleeve notes here as well. So musicians we got featured on here are, we've got Theo Travis, Ben Castle, Nick Beggs, Nick France, Jordan Rudess, Tony Levin, the legendary Steve Hackett. We've also got Marcus Rutter. We've also got Trey Gunn from King Crimson. And we've also got string arrangements by Dave Stewart from Bruford. And we've also got Pat Mastellato, also from King Crimson as well. So a lot of star power on this album. So tracks we got here are Grace for Drowning, Sectarian, Deformed to Form a Star, which is absolutely epic, No Part of Me, The Beautiful Postcard, Raider Prelude, and Remainder the Black Dog. So great collection of songs here for disc one. And the standout tracks for me are Deformed to Form a Star, Remainder the Black Dog, and Postcard, which is just absolutely gorgeous. So the next tracks we got here on disc two is Belle de Jour, Index, Track 1, Raider 2, Like Dust I Have Cleared from My Eye. So pretty much a continuation of disc 1 and equally as beautiful and as atmospheric. And the standout tracks for me are Belle de Jour, which is more of an acoustic solo piece, very similar to the legendary Pat Metheny. It's got a very haunting and enchanting sound and great acoustic playing from Stephen Wilson. We've got Index, which is creepy, very out there, and very spooky. If you've seen the video for it, you know exactly what I'm talking about, and it's one of Stephen Wilson's absolute best. And it's got Pat Mastellato on electronic drums, and it's just absolutely remarkable. And the other standout track for me is Like Dusk I Have Cleared from My Eye. So great collection of songs here. As I said, Insurgentes was more of a solo project. Grace for Drowning pretty much would kick off Stephen Wilson's solo career, and what a great album to start with. And I highly recommend anyone who wants to check out Stephen Wilson's solo catalogue of music. This is the album to really get your teeth into, and there's a lot of great songs from Stephen Wilson. A lot of the songs he would still go on to play to this day. So there you have it. Grace for Drowning, an absolute classic and one of my all-time favourite Steven Wilson albums, and highly recommend you get the double album, or if you can, try and track down the double CD Blu-ray audio. It's got more extra tracks as well, and some of those are definitely worth checking out. So highly recommend you listen to those bonus tracks. They're really good. So there you have it. Grace for Drowning, an absolute masterpiece from Steven Wilson and one of his best ever. Great stuff. So we move on to the next album, which came out in 2012, and this is a double CD and Blu-ray live recording, and this one is called Get All You Deserve. So Steven Wilson has become a full-fledged solo artist and put together his own working band of some of the best musicians in the world, and it's a true who's who here. So we've got here Steven Wilson on guitars, keyboards, and vocals, Adam Holzman from Miles Davis on keyboards, Marco Miniman on drums from the Aristocrats, Nick Beggs on bass, backing vocals, and Chapman Stick from the Steve Hackett Band, Nico Tisnoy on second guitar, and Theo Travis from Soft Machine on saxophones, flute, clarinet, and additional keyboards. A true who's who of some of the best musicians in the world. And Get All You Deserve is a concert that Steven Wilson put on in Mexico City. And for me, this is without a doubt Steven Wilson's finest hour, and he's on top form. And for me, this was probably the peak of Steven Wilson solo artist, and he has never ever sounded better than he does here. And the guys in the band, true heavy hitters, everybody sounds amazing here on top form. And like I said before, the best sound, the best production, and more importantly, the best musicians in the world. And it's all here. And the material that's featured on Get All You Deserve is tracks from Grace for Drowning, Insurgentes, and we've got a brand new track which was never recorded, but it would eventually end up on Steven Wilson's next solo album, The Raven That Refused to Sing, and it's all here and more. Brilliant stuff here, so let's have a look. That is a cool shot of the live audience. Classic Steven Wilson with his trademark gas mask, which has always been a staple part of Steven Wilson's shows. Look at that, that's unbelievable. Great stuff here. And that's some cool visual shots here. Brilliant stuff. So at one point you see all the band wearing gas masks. There's a very spooky but epic shot of Nick Beggs on stick with the gas mask. Yeah, look at that. Amazing show. Great shots of the band in action. There we are. Some great shots of the show. That is amazing. Great photography. That's what I've always liked about Steven Wilson's live albums. Get some beautiful shots of the concert. So we got sleeve notes here. A shot of Steven Wilson. There's the band. Great band of musicians he's got here. And yeah, love it. And we got some sleeve notes and production notes here as well. And there we go. We've got another shot there. And another great shot there as well. So great stuff here. And a great performance as well. So All of the music is written and composed by Stephen Wilson, and as I said, it's a fantastic live album. Definitely worth checking out if you're wanting to get the feel of what a Stephen Wilson show is like. This is the one for you. I was very lucky to see Stephen Wilson once back in 2015. One of the best shows I have ever seen in my life. 3 solid hours of just amazing music and musicianship and playing. And one thing about Stephen Wilson, he always gives you your money's worth and he never disappoints and he never leaves you short. He always gives his all on the stage and always delivers each and every time. And I'm hoping I get to see Stephen Wilson again in the near future. I've only ever seen him once, and as I said, one of the best live shows I have ever seen. If you happen to see Stephen Wilson play near you, make sure you catch him. You're in for something really special. As great as Stephen Wilson is in the studio, there's no better experience in the world than Stephen Wilson live. He's just on another level and he really brings his A game. So, tracks we got here are Intro, Citadel, No Twilights Within the Courts of the Sun, Index, Deformed to Form a Star, Secretarian, Postcard, Remained of a Black Dog, Harmony Corrine, Abandoner, Like Dust I Have Cleared From My Eye, Luminal, which makes its live debut here, and it would go on to be featured in The Raven That's Refused to Sing, and it's a brilliant track, and it's got lots of influences of different progressive rock bands, such as King Crimson, Jethro Tull, Rush. There's even a bit of jazz influences like Miles Davis and Soft Machine. It's all there, and it's just an amazing track and one of the best tracks of the album. Vino para las Hades, No Part of Me, Raider 2, the epic Get All You Deserve, and the outro Litany. So great collection of songs, and it's an amazing live concert, and it's one of those things you have to really watch all the way through to really get the full gist of what Stephen Wilson, solo artist, is all about. And it's a remarkable show. Everybody's on top form. Everybody really gives it all, and it's a true supergroup. No weak links here. And as I said, Stephen Wilson knows how to put a band together, and that's why he's one of the best band leaders today. So standout tracks for me are No Twilights Within the Courts of the Sun, Index, Deformed to Form a Star, Remained of the Black Dog, Postcard, Harmony Corrine, Luminal, and Raider 2, and the epic Get All You Deserve. But aside from those standout tracks, this is a fantastic live performance and certainly one of the best I have ever seen. And it's one of those situations where the performance, the playing, the music is so good that you're practically drawn to Stephen Wilson band to the point where it almost feels like you're seeing these guys live and in person, because that's how good this performance really is. And as I said, one of the best live performances I have ever seen on Blu-ray or DVD, and it's really special. And to me, it really showcases Stephen Wilson, solo artist at his peak. So there you have it. Get All You Deserve. For me, perhaps the best Stephen Wilson live recording of all time. Certainly up there with the Porcupine Tree live recordings, and no weak links in this band. And the performance and the music, everything about it is just off the charts. So if you're looking to get the feel of what Stephen Wilson's solo artist is like, highly recommend you check out this double CD and Blu-ray live recording. It's absolutely fantastic, and for me, it's a special favourite of mine, and absolutely love it. It's a classic. So there you have it. Stephen Wilson, Get All You Deserve. Brilliant stuff. So we move on to the next album, which came out in 2013. And I think I speak for everyone when I say this, that this next album could very well be Stephen Wilson's greatest solo album of all time. Certainly the best he's ever made outside of everything he's ever done. And for me, It's an absolute classic, a true masterpiece. Prog Magazine voted it album of the decade. That's a bold statement to make, and I think it deserves all of the accolades, praise, and respect that it deserves. And for me, this was without a doubt Stephen Wilson's finest hour and the peak of his solo career. And the next one is called The Raven That Refused to Sing. A timeless classic, kind of like a love letter to 1970s progressive rock. It's got all of the influences from King Crimson to Yes to Rush to Pink Floyd. Everything you like about progressive rock is in this album and more. There's jazz fusion influences, there's ambience. This album has got everything. And one particular thing that I really want to highlight about The Raven That Refused to Sing, it features, for me, the finest guitar solo you will ever hear. And for me, probably the best guitar solo I have ever heard since UK in the Dead of Night by Alan Holdsworth. That's a pretty bold statement I made there. That's my opinion, and I'm damn sure sticking with it because it's that good. You know the track I'm talking about, it's on here. Raven, That's Refused to Sing, is absolutely beautiful. Every song on here, from start to finish, it's just a classic. And for me, as a songwriter, Stephen Wilson has really excelled himself here, and it's a remarkable collection of songs. And this, for me, is just amazing. So let's have a look. So we've got 6 tracks and a couple of long epics, but this is just top-notch stuff here. And we've got here some beautiful artwork here. Remarkable, absolutely remarkable. Look at that, it's just absolutely beautiful. Look at that, it's just brilliant stuff. Ooh. Love it. Love the artwork here. The artwork here is just amazing. Great stuff. Absolutely great. Yeah, great this is. So the Stephen Wilson band is pretty much more or less the same lineup, but we've got a new addition here. So we've got Stephen Wilson on vocals, mellotron, keyboards and guitars, and bass. Nick Beggs on bass, Chapman Stick and backing vocals. Adam Holzman on Fender Rhodes, Hammond organ, piano and mini moog. Marco Miniman on drums, Theo Travis on saxophones, clarinet and flute. And we've got Guthrie Gavain, who is the newest addition to the Stephen Wilson band on lead guitar. He's also from the Aristocrats, one of the best guitar players in the world, and he is all over this album, and he plays a big part in the music. More on that in a moment. And we've got some special guests here. We've got Jaco Jacek from King Crimson on additional vocals, who's featured on 2 tracks, and the legendary producer himself, Alan Parsons, on Haw guitar, who is featured on 1 track. Great stuff here, and very cool sketch of the band, I must say. Very, very cool sketch. So, as I said, The Raven That Refused to Sing, probably without a doubt, Stephen Wilson's finest hour, and certainly the best solo album of his whole career. That's a bold statement I made there, but like I said, it's my opinion. I'm sticking with it. Brilliant album. So we've got Luminol, Drive Home, The Holy Drinker, The Pin Drop, The Watchmaker, and the title track, The Raven That Refused to Sing. Remarkable. Every song on here is absolutely remarkable, and for me, this is probably the best sounding album of Stephen Wilson's entire solo catalogue. So the standout tracks for me are Luminol, The Holy Drinker, The Raven That Refused to Sing, and my all-time favourite song of the entire album, Drive Home. And as I mentioned, features the best guitar solo I have ever heard, courtesy of the one and only Guthrie Govan from the Aristocrats. He just nailed it. And from what I read, this was done in one take. He just played one guitar solo, which is the one that you hear, and that was it. The rest is history. Fantastic guitar player. Out of all of the guitar players that Steven Wilson has worked with, they're all great. John Wesley, Dave Kilminster, Alex Hutchings, to name a few. Guthrie Govan could technically be the best guitarist that Steven Wilson has ever worked with and probably will ever work with. He's that good. And the playing on that track, Drive Home, the solo, tell you what, he must have sold a lot of devils to get that guy in the band. Guys like Guthrie Govan don't come cheap, and they don't come every day. So he really nailed it here. His guitar playing is just remarkable. Anybody who's seen him with Asia or with the Aristocrats, he is an absolute machine. As is everyone in the album, everyone in the band. Marco Miniman, Nick Beggs, Theo Travis, Adam Holzman, and Steven Wilson himself. I have never heard a band sound as tight as the Steven Wilson band do here. Doesn't get any better than this. So there you have it. Steven Wilson, The Raven That Refused to Sing. Not only my favourite Steven Wilson solo album of all time, but probably his best one he's ever made. Certainly a hard one to top. I can't think of any that come even close to this. It's fantastic. So there you have it. The Raven That Refused to Sing. Brilliant stuff. So we move on to the next album, and this also came out in 2013, and it's an EP, and it's called Drive Home. So this features the track Drive Home from The Raven That Refused to Sing, but there's different versions, and there's also a few live tracks from a concert that the Steven Wilson band did in Frankfurt. So, as I said, it's kind of like a mini live album and a continuation of The Raven That Refused to Sing. And it's really good, to hear all these different versions of Drive Home. It's really, really good here. So, tracks we got: Drive Home Edit, The Birthday Party, The Raven That Refused to Sing orchestral version, The Holy Drinker live in Frankfurt, Insurgentes live in Frankfurt, For Watermaker also in live in Frankfurt, and The Raven That Refused to Sing live in Frankfurt. And the other disc is a DVD that features some live films of the concert and a couple of promotional films as well. So it's a really good little EP here. And it's kind of like a little sequel to The Raven That Refused to Sing. So, same band, Steven Wilson on keyboards, guitars, bass, and vocals, Nick Beggs on bass, and Chapman Stick and backing vocals, Guthrie Govan on lead guitar, Adam Holzman on keyboards, Marco Miniman on drums, and Theo Travis on flutes, saxophones, and clarinets. So, there we are. Good stuff there. Lovely drawings, as you can see there. Brilliant drawings here. Absolutely brilliant drawings, I must say. So, standout tracks for me are The Birthday Party, Raven That Refused to Sing orchestral version, Insurgentes. Never get tired of hearing that. One of Steven Wilson's absolute best songs ever. And The Raven That Refused to Sing live in Frankfurt, so that's like the original version. So a lot of these tracks are like extended versions but played live. That's fantastic. So there you have it. Steven Wilson Drive Home EP. If you want to get into Steven Wilson's music, or you want to know more about what The Raven That Refused to Sing before purchasing it, highly recommend you check out Drive Home EP. It's kind of like a little warm-up for what The Raven That Refused to Sing is all about. So you get to hear what it's like, and you also get to hear how some of these outstanding songs sound live, and you also get to witness some highlights from that tour And for me, as I said earlier, The Raven That Refused to Sing is, without a doubt, Stephen Wilson's best solo album he's ever made. It's that good. So there you have it. Stephen Wilson, Drive Home EP. Brilliant album. So we move on to the next album, which came out in 2015. And this is a double recording. Hand Cannot Erase. So just like The Raven That's Refused to Sing was an absolute classic, Hand Cannot Erase is another masterpiece from Stephen Wilson as he continues with his working band of great musicians. And unlike The Raven That's Refused to Sing, this album has a different feel to it and it has a concept behind it. And the story is that this is about a young girl who is very popular and has what appears to be the best life ever, and she ends up dying in her apartment and she lays there dead for well over 3 years before someone actually finds her. And throughout different points of the album, you get to hear and listen to what this young lady's life was like before she ended up dying. And I went to this tour. It was my first time in seeing Stephen Wilson. The band played the whole Hand Cannot Erase in its entirety from start to finish, and it was, as I said earlier, one of the best shows I have ever seen. Everybody was on top form. The sound was great. Everybody in the band sounded great. And as great as Hand Cannot Erase sounds in the studio, it sounds even better live. And it's an unbelievable listening experience and certainly one of the best experiences I have ever had. And as I said before, if you happen to see Stephen Wilson near your town, go and see him. You won't be disappointed. You're in for something really special. So let's have a look. So there she is. And there's the young lady that this album's all about. And there's the lyrics and different pictures that conform the tracks. So that's the young lady and her boyfriend. There's some more pictures there as well. Yes. One thing about Stephen Wilson's albums, as I said before, the artwork is just incredible. So there's some more pictures with lyrics. Looks very similar to my t-shirt, which I picked up at the show. It's my tour shirt. There's some cool more pictures of the young lady's life. Yeah, look at that. Lovely. There's some more there. And some sleeve notes and production notes. And there is the man himself. So it's pretty much the same band as The Raven That Refused to Sing, but this time Theo Travis has a much smaller role on this album. So this band is, whereas before was more of a six-piece band, now it's like kind of scaled down to a five-piece band. So all of the compositions are written and composed by Stephen Wilson, and the musicians featured on here is Adam Holzman, Marco Miniman, Guthrie Gavain, Nick Beggs, Ninette Tayeb, Theo Travis, Dave Gregory, Chad Wackerman, the lovely and talented Catherine Jenkins, she's on this album as well, the London Session Orchestra, and the Cardinal Vaughan Memorial School Choir. Excellent stuff here. Great sounding album, as you'd expect from Stephen Wilson. And Hand Cannot Erase, great album here. So first track we got is First Regret, 3 Years Older, The title track, Hand Cannot Erase, which is kind of like got a stereophonics feel to it. The gorgeous and trance-like Perfect Life. The beautiful Routine, Home Invasion, Regret, #9, Transience, Ancestral, Happy Returns, and Ascendance here on. Fantastic collection of songs, and as I said, I got to witness Steven Wilson Band play the entire album from start to finish, and it was absolutely incredible. And the standout tracks for me are 3 Years Older, Hand Cannot Erase, Perfect Life, Routine, Home Invasion, and Regret, #9, which once again has one of the most incredible Guthrie Govan guitar solos you will ever hear, and Adam Holzman's Moog synthesizer solos is just off the chart. Marco Miniman and Nick Beggs are just absolutely attacking this piece with reckless abandon, and Steven Wilson is like full on rock mode on guitar. Doesn't get any better than that. And Hand Cannot Erase, another fine masterpiece from Steven Wilson himself, and what an amazing lineup of musicians. Now, whereas The Raven That's Refused to Sing was more in the line of traditional old school progressive rock, Hand Cannot Erase, although it has some pop influences, is a much more progressive metal kind of album with some trance like influences and some ambient soundscapes. Absolutely amazing album, and right up there with The Raven That's Refused to Sing and Grace for Drowning. Fantastic, and one that I would also highly recommend to anybody who's looking to get into Steven Wilson's solo catalogue. So there you have it. Hand Cannot Erase, another masterpiece from Steven Wilson. So we move on to the next album, which came out in 2016, and this is an EP, Four and a Half. So Four and a Half is an EP that features tracks that were unused from various recording sessions and features outtakes and tracks that weren't used from Hand Cannot Erase and The Raven That's Refused to Sing. And it features two different incarnations of Steven Wilson's working band. And we also get an extra special treat. We get a reworking of a classic Porcupine Tree track. So, highly recommended, worth checking out. And it's interesting to see how much the Steven Wilson band has evolved. Whereas the first incarnation, which featured Marco Miniman, Guthrie Govan, Theo Travis, that was more like progressive metal meets jazz fusion. And the next incarnation, which features Craig Blundell and Dave Kilminster, which kind of leans more towards traditional classic rock, but still very much in the style and sound of Steven Wilson. So let's have a look. So there is the picture of the two girls from Hand Cannot Erase, the two best friends. There we are. There's the tracks as well. So all of the tracks are written and composed by Steven Wilson, and it's got 6 tracks. We've got My Book of Regrets, Year of the Plague, Happiness Free, Sunday Rain Sets In, The Melancholy, and a reworking of Porcupine Tree classic Don't Hate Me from their album Stupid Dream, which features the lovely Nanette Tayeb on lead vocals. Absolutely incredible version. I love the original version. That's absolutely amazing. It's one of my favourite Porcupine Tree tracks, but it gets some real nice workouts here by Steven Wilson's solo band, and Nanette does an incredible job on the lead vocals. So, musicians featured here is, of course, Steven Wilson, Adam Holzman, Nick Beggs, Guthrie Govan, Dave Kilminster, Craig Blundell, Marco Miniman, Chad Wackerman, Theo Travis, and Nanette Tayeb. Brilliant stuff here. So, Some artwork there. Some more gorgeous artwork there as well. And some more pictures of the young girl who passed away in the apartment in Hand Cannot Erase. So, on the first track, My Book of Regrets features Stephen Wilson, Adam Holzman, Dave Kilminster, Nick Beggs, and Craig Blundell. So that's like one of the incarnations of the Stephen Wilson band. And we also got on the second track, which is more of a duo piece with Stephen Wilson and Adam Holzman. Then on track 3, we got Happiness Free, which is the incarnation before with Adam Holzman, Guthrie Govain, Nick Beggs, and Marco Miniman, but without Theo Travis. So that's more from the Hand Cannot Erase sessions. And the second track is also from the sessions for The Raven That Refused to Sing and My Book of Regrets, which is the first track, which is from a session which was recorded back in 2015. It's more of a live track. And we've also got here on this track Stephen Wilson, Adam Holzman, Nick Beggs, Chad Wackerman, and Theo Travis. So that's kind of like an in between incarnation. Marco Miniman is pretty much gone from the band, as is Guthrie Govain. So Stephen Wilson's already making changes to the lineup. And then the next track here, we've got Stephen Wilson, Adam Holzman, Nick Beggs, and Craig Blundell. So again, this is kind of more the recent incarnation. So that track was recorded in 2013, and the track before that is a leftover track from Hand Cannot Erase sessions. And the last track, which is a reworking of a Porcupine Tree track, which was originally featured on the band's classic album called Stupid Dream, features Stephen Wilson, Adam Holzman, Dave Kilminster, Nick Beggs, Craig Blundell, Theo Travis, and Ninette Tayeb. Excellent stuff here. Standout tracks for me are Year of the Plague, Happiness Free, and Don't Hate Me, which has a fiery sax solo from Theo Travis. I love the original by Porcupine Tree. It's one of my all-time favourite songs from the band, but Don't Hate Me gets a real nice workout here, and Ninette Tayeb, her vocals are just absolutely amazing. So great stuff here. And it's nice that Stephen Wilson hasn't completely ignored his Porcupine Tree past. So it's great that he's still playing a few of those songs, because let's be honest, Porcupine Tree pretty much, more or less put him on the map really as far as where he is now. So there you have it. 4.5. Great little collection of songs from Hand Cannot Erase and The Raven That's Refused to Sing. And they're more like outtakes and tracks that were never used. And we also get a nice reworking of a Porcupine Tree track. So not bad. Great stuff. Nice little EP. And again, something for all Stephen Wilson fans to check out. So there you have it. 4.5. Brilliant stuff. So we move on to the next album, which came out in 2017. And this album is kind of a bit of a different album compared to the previous solo recordings that Stephen Wilson has put out, as we see Stephen Wilson is slowly starting to move away from the progressive rock and metal style of music as he moves into more uncharted territory and heads towards more of the pop realms, as we get to see more of Stephen Wilson's commercial side of his music personality. And this one is called To the Bone. So To the Bone sees Stephen Wilson, as I mentioned already, going into more pop territory. There's still some progressive elements for all Stephen Wilson fans to get their teeth into, but this album is a little bit more on the softer side compared to Hand Cannot Erase and The Raven That's Refused to Sing, and even Grace for Drowning. This album is a little bit more laid back, but there's still some heavy tracks in there as well. But as I said, it's kind of more like a 50-50 kind of album. So it's kind of like half progressive rock and half pop. So there's definitely some influences from pop artists and some of the other pop bands that Stephen Wilson likes and is into. But there's still some great tracks, and there's still some stuff here to get your teeth into and some stuff you can listen to and enjoy. I wouldn't say this album is bad. It's certainly a bit of a U-turn compared to the previous Stephen Wilson solo recordings, but that's what makes Stephen Wilson so interesting, because he's not afraid to go into different directions. And it's almost like his way of saying, well, I've kind of done all the prog stuff now. I fancy going into a more softer side and going into more commercial side. So if you want to come along, you're more than welcome to. If you don't, sorry but not sorry, but this is where I'm going and this is what I'm doing right now. So good stuff here. So tracks we got here is To the Bone, Nowhere Now, Pariah, The Same Asylum as Before, Refuge, Permeating, Blank Tapes, People Who Eat Darkness, Song of I, Detonation, and Song of Unborn. Brilliant stuff here. So let's have a look, shall we? That's a brilliant picture, I must say. And that as well. So we got some cool visuals here and some lyrics. Some more cool visuals and lyrics as well. Some more visuals. Love the artwork here. And there is Stephen Wilson himself. There we are. Some more cool visuals. Brilliant stuff. And some more visuals as well. So the musicians that are featured on this album are Nanette Tayeb, David Collar, Paul Stacey, Nick Beggs, Robin Mullarkey, Adam Holzman, Craig Blundell, Jeremy Stacey from King Crimson, and Pete Eckford, Mark Felton, Sophie Hunger, Jasmine Walkes, Dave Kilminster, Dave Stewart, the London Session Orchestra, Synergy Vocals, Paul Draper, and Andy Partridge. So, unlike the previous couple of albums that featured a working band for Stephen Wilson, this album, To the Bone, is kind of like a revolving lineup. So there's a number of guest musicians who would go on to form the next incarnation of the Stephen Wilson band. So the standout tracks for me are Pariah, The Same Asylum as Before, Blank Tapes, People Who Eat Darkness, Song of I, Detonation, and Song of Unborn. Great collection of songs here, and as I said, a little bit different as opposed to the previous Stephen Wilson albums, but at the same time, you know, there's still some good tracks you can get your teeth into, and the best track for me by far is without a doubt Pariah. You know, the way Stephen Wilson's vocals and Nanette Tayeb's vocals, the way they blend together and their harmonies, it's just absolutely beautiful. And that instrumental section with the guitars is just absolutely phenomenal. Doesn't get any better than that. So there you have it. Stephen Wilson, To the Bone, a more of a departure from the progressive rock and metal style of music and more heading into the pop elements of things. So this is more or less a commercial album for Stephen Wilson, and one that would set the table for a future, pun intended, album. So there you have it. Stephen Wilson, To the Bone. As I mentioned already, more of a commercial album for Stephen Wilson. Not bad. Pretty good. So we move on to the next album, which came out in 2018. And this is a double CD and Blu-ray live recording. And this one is called Home Invasion in concert at the Royal Albert Hall. So back in 2010, Porcupine Tree played their final gig, which was at the Royal Albert Hall, and many say that was when the band truly hit its peak before they completely disappeared from the scene as Steven Wilson emerged and forged his own solo career. So, in a way, you can kind of look at this as everything coming full circle for Steven Wilson. So, as I said, in 2010, Porcupine Tree played their final gig as a band at the Royal Albert Hall, and 8 years later, Steven Wilson returns as a headlining solo act as he brings his band to the Royal Albert Hall. And Steven Wilson, by this point, had truly peaked as a solo artist, and he went from being the greatest musician you've never heard of to the greatest musician that everybody has heard of. So he went from being part of a band to a headlining act in his own right. And this double CD and Blu-ray live recording features material from To the Bone, Hand Cannot Erase, and a couple of other Steven Wilson solo albums, as well as some little Porcupine Tree tracks thrown in there as well in the set list. So there's a bit of everything in here, and you can kind of look at this as a retrospective of not only Steven Wilson's solo career, but his Porcupine Tree career as well, and some of the other many projects that Steven Wilson has been a part of. So let's have a look, shall we? Nice. So let's have a look. Look at that. That's incredible set there. That's Steven Wilson always delivers. I've only been to the Royal Albert Hall a couple of times. Big place, very big place. And there's the band. There we are. Great visuals here. That's an amazing shot. It really is. Yeah, that's really cool. Unfortunately, I didn't get to see the show. Tickets weren't cheap, but it was still an amazing show. No doubt about it. There's the band. So we've got Steven Wilson, Ninette Tayeb, Alex Hutchings, Adam Holzman, Craig Blundell, and Nick Beggs. So this is kind of like a more recent incarnation of the Steven Wilson band. So tracks we got here on disc 1, we got Truth Intro, Nowhere Now, Pariah, Home Invasion / Regret, #9. The Creator has a master tape, Refuge, People Who Eat Darkness, Ancestral, Arriving Somewhere But Not Here, Permeating, Song of I, Lazarus, Detonation, The Same Silent as Before. And then on disc 2 we've got Song of Unborn, Vermilion Core, Sleep Together, Even Less, Blank Tapes, Sound of Music, and The Raven That's Refused to Sing. And then on the DVD we've got 3 extra rehearsal tracks of Routine, Hand Cannot Erase, and Heart Attack in a Lay-By. Pretty good set list, I must say. Standout tracks for me on disc 1 are Pariah, Home Invasion / Regret, #9, Arriving Somewhere But Not Here, Lazarus, and standout tracks for me on disc 2 is Sound of Music, The Raven That's Refused to Sing, and Song of Unborn and Sleep Together. Great live performance. This is the Steven Wilson band at its peak, with Steven Wilson on top form, Ninette Tayeb with lovely vocals and harmonies, Nick Beggs and Craig Blundell delivering rock solid grooves and working very well together as a muscular rhythm section. Great guitar playing from Alex Hutchings and unbelievable keyboard playing from Adam Holzman. This is a fantastic live recording. I still have to go with Get All You Deserve as the better live show, but this one is certainly no slouch, and it's definitely up there with that live recording. And this really captures the live feel of Steven Wilson and his music. And for me, this is where Steven Wilson really excelled himself as a solo artist and just grew and just became a monster headlining solo act in his own right. So there you have it. Steven Wilson, Home Invasion, in concert at the Royal Albert Hall. Fantastic live recording, and definitely one worth checking out. Also, if you're looking to get into the music of Steven Wilson and wanting to know what it's like to see him live. Fantastic stuff. So this brings us to the next album, which came out in 2021. And this album is probably the most polarizing album of Steven Wilson's entire catalogue. Not just as a solo artist, but everything he's ever done. And this one is The Future Bites. So you kind of saw the writing on the wall going all the way back to the bone. There was some commercial elements, but there was still some proggy elements and some of the classic hallmarks that we know Steven Wilson for. But with this album, this is a very commercial album, and this album was very polarizing for a lot of fans. Some people liked it, some people didn't like it, some people questioned what was he trying to achieve here? Was he trying to get a hit single? I kind of look at this album as Steven Wilson's mainstream album. It's got a very mainstream feel to it. There's some very good tracks on here. There are some tracks that are not so great, but this doesn't mean this album is terrible. I just say it's not as strong as some of the previous albums. If you're looking for something that's like Grace for Drowning, you're not going to find it here. Or if you're looking for a more proggy kind of album like The Raven That Refused to Sing, you're not going to find it in this album. But this album's not all bad. There is some good stuff here. Not really an album that I tend to reach out for very often, and that's for obvious reasons. But I don't dislike this album. I just like some Steven Wilson stuff just a little bit more. But as I said, there are some good tracks on here. So let's have a look. So, got some lyrics there and some messages there. It's kind of like a little message in each track there. So, there's some more lyrics. There's some more lyrics here as well. I'm guessing that's supposed to be a brick, I think. Or it could be a bar of soap. I don't know. And there's some more lyrics as well. And there's some more lyrics here as well. And there's a full breakdown of who plays on what track. So the musicians that are featured on this album is we've got David Costin, Jarl and Mia, Michael Spearman, Richard Barbieri from Porcupine Tree, Wendy Harriott, Crystal Williams, Rue Reynolds, Rina Mushonga, Mos Capri, Jaco, Yalmir, Amelia, Lihi, Romy, Guy, Gal, Matty, Tom, Shy, Jason Cooper. We've also got Adam Holzman. We've got the London Session Orchestra, Rotem Wilson, and a special guest appearance from the legendary Elton John and Fifi Dangerfield. So most of the musicians that are featured on here are not very well known, apart from Nick Beggs, Richard Barbieri from Porcupine Tree, and Steven Wilson's longtime collaborator, Adam Holzman, and of course the legendary Elton John, who just makes like a special guest appearance on one track. So all of the compositions are written and composed by Stephen Wilson. And as I said, it's a 50-50 album. There's some good tracks on here. There's some tracks that are classic Stephen Wilson, and there are some tracks that are just more like dance numbers, which, quite frankly, dancing is not really for me. So tracks we got here is Unself, Self, King Ghost, 12 Things I Forgot, Eminent Sleaze, Man of the People, Personal Shopper, which I think is the best track of the entire album, Follower, and Count of Unease. Not a hit and miss kind of album for me, but not really an album that I reach out for. As I said, it's a good sounding album. The production is excellent. The vocals are on point, but again, I don't look at this as classic Stephen Wilson. When I think of Stephen Wilson, I think of his, you know, airy vocals, amazing guitar playing, piano playing, keyboards, all of that sort of thing. Blistering prog rock and blistering progressive metal. You know, his ballad song-like writing. That's what I want to hear when I think of Stephen Wilson. I don't really want to hear disco tracks. It's not really what I want to hear or expect to see from Stephen Wilson. But at the same time, I appreciate and respect that Stephen Wilson wanted to try something different. Maybe he fancied himself as a mainstream artist, each to their own. More power to him. But it's not really what I want to hear from Stephen Wilson, especially when you look at what came before this. It's definitely a U-turn. Even with To the Bone, it was a very commercial album, but there was still some classic Stephen Wilson material. This is kind of the same thing, but a much more drastic departure from what came before. And the best track for me is Personal Shopper. I think that's absolutely incredible. If you check out the extended version of this album, there's a longer version of Personal Shopper, which is like 16 minutes long, and it's really good. 12 Things I Forgot is pretty good. Man of the People is pretty good, but the rest of it is not for me. But still highly enjoyable, I think, but not an album I tend to reach out for when I want to listen to Stephen Wilson. I still think his earlier stuff is very strong and much more harder to beat than this. So, yeah, there you have it. Stephen Wilson, The Future Bites. Is this album bad? No. Could it be better? Absolutely. Will it go down as one of his best? Probably not, but what can you do, really? It is what it is. So there you have it. Stephen Wilson, The Future Bites. So, which Stephen Wilson solo album do I think is the best one? Well, it's a pretty easy one for me because I pretty much said all of this at the very beginning, and I speak for a lot of people. I think this one is the absolute best album that Stephen Wilson has ever made, and I'm sure a lot of people out there will agree with me. And the best one is The Raven That Refused to Sing. This is, without a doubt, Stephen Wilson's finest hour. This is where he truly peaked as a solo artist, and for me, this has got the best band ever. Marco Miniman, Guthrie Gavain, Nick Beggs, Adam Holzman, Theo Travis, and of course, Stephen Wilson himself. Doesn't get any better than this. For me, this is the best band that he has ever had, and certainly up there with Porcupine Tree in terms of being the best group of musicians ever assembled. The music on here is absolutely fantastic from start to finish. It does not get any better than this album. There's a good reason why Prog Magazine voted this album of the decade, and deservedly so. It's absolutely amazing, and definitely one I would recommend to all people out there who are looking to get into Stephen Wilson's music. It's that good. Go and check it out. You won't be disappointed. This is Stephen Wilson's all-time classic album. Doesn't get any better than this. So that's going to be it from me. I'm going to wrap this up now. What's your favourite Stephen Wilson solo album? Is it Insurgentes, Grace for Drowning, Get All You Deserve, The Raven That's Refused to Sing, Drive Home, Hand Cannot Erase, 4.5, To the Bone, Home Invasion in concert at the Royal Albert Hall, or The Future Bites. There's no right or wrong answer. We all have our favourite albums. You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Progressive Rock and Metal album review series. So until then, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening.